Hello, everybody, and welcome to Squibbler's Wednesday webinar. Today, we're going to talk about some small things that you can do to elevate the writing in your book. When I first conceived of doing this, I thought it would be something where we would talk about quite a few techniques, poetic devices, but we're really going to focus on the metaphor for this one because there's just so much to say about metaphors. So in this webinar, you're going to learn functional versus memorable writing, and that's a sort of a lead into using devices in your literary devices in your writing. We'll take a look at using the metaphor and why they work, and we'll take a look at some tips for writing metaphors. So this is going to be the first in a series of details on writing. So we'll take a look at some of these literary and poetic devices that you may not have seen since high school. And we'll also look at some examples from renowned authors and how to use and create these examples using Squibbler's AI. So there are so many, as I said, that it would be overwhelming to include all of them, which is what I initially thought, not all of them, but quite a few. But I think it's going to make more sense and be easier to understand if we really do an intense study on different devices that are successful in writing. So we are going to talk about functional versus memorable writing first, because there's a difference, and part of that difference has to do with literary devices. Functional writing is going to communicate basic information clearly. It follows standard grammar and structure. It tells the reader what's going to happen in a straightforward manner, and it focuses primarily on conveying plot, facts, or ideas. It's technically correct, but it's often forgettable. It's missing something deeper, and that's what's going to take us from functional to memorable writing. Memorable writing, on the other hand, creates an emotional connection with the reader. It uses these poetic devices and techniques and literary techniques that elevate the prose. It's going to stay in the reader's mind much longer than functional prose after they've finished reading. It also uses language in distinctive and creative ways. Memorable writing uses a unique voice or style that feels specific to the author. It also creates vivid images and sensory experiences through descriptive language. It often contains quotable passages that readers want to revisit as well. These are those things that we highlight in a book, or we put a sticky note next to, and so forth. It also transforms ordinary observations into extraordinary insights. I tend to call myself a functional writer when I'm working on my first draft. I'm really trying to work through the plot, get everything I need down. And then when I edit, that's when I'm going to go back and use some of this more memorable writer. Of course, there are very gifted writers who can include memorable writing all at once. And some of us have to work a little bit more at it. And I consider myself in the type of writer that needs to work more. So here's an example of the difference with functional and memorable writing. A functional sentence might sound something like, "It was a hot day and John was sweating as he walked down the street." There's absolutely nothing wrong with that sentence. It conveys information very clearly. We have a good description of the setting and who's doing the walking and what's happening to him as he's walking. But when you compare that with a memorable writing, you'll see there's a huge difference. So in the memorable passage, we have, "The sun stalked John like a predator, drawing beads of surrender from his skin as the pavement rippled with heat beneath his feet." So here we have a metaphor. We have the sun being compared to a predator, and we have his skin surrendering, John's skin surrendering, and even the pavement is rippling. So all these neat things that are going on with literary devices. The difference also between functional and memorable is that functional writing is meant to deliver information, while memorable writing is delivering an experience. In publishing with functional writing, you might get your story across, but it's the memorable writing, the little things like metaphors, rhythm, sensory details, that's going to separate published authors from unpublished ones, and bestsellers from those mid-list titles that don't reach a larger audience. So we're going to start looking now at the metaphor. And what metaphors use is the power of comparison. And the reason that these are successful is that they resonate emotionally with readers. They create an impact, as we've seen, and they do look for experience over function. They work by comparative language, like metaphors and similes and analogies work because they create connections between things that are seemingly unrelated. And this is going to allow readers to understand one concept through the lens of another concept. This cognitive leap is going to create deeper and more intuitive understandings rather than just a direct description alone. I guess we should probably start with the definition of a metaphor if you haven't seen it in a while. A metaphor is a figure of speech that compares two unlike things without using a comparative word like or as. It creates an implicit comparison by stating that one thing is like another, even though they are often quite different. And how do they work? How do metaphors function? They're going to transfer qualities from one object to another. They also help readers understand unfamiliar or abstract concepts through familiar ones. They're going to create vivid mental images that engage readers emotionally. They compress complex ideas into concise and memorable language. So here are some examples that are fairly famous. You might remember some of these from your high school reading. Shakespeare's "All the world's a stage and we are merely players." This, of course, is comparing our lives to those of actors and being on a stage. Here's one from Chilean poet Pablo Neruda. "The night gallops on its shadowy mare, shedding blue tassels over the land." So here we have the night being compared to a horse, a mare, where even the tassels that are on its wear are shedding off into over the land. The last one is from Langston Hughes, the poem From Mother to Son. "Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor, bare." So this is the mother describing her life as not being a pleasant place, not being a crystal stair. Hers is a wooden staircase with splinters, boards torn up, and no carpet on the floor. Metaphors can also act as conceptual bridges. They're going to make the abstract ideas concrete. So here's an example. Her depression was a heavy blanket she couldn't throw off. This makes the abstract experience of depression physically understandable. So for readers who have not experienced depression or are not familiar with it, they're going to understand that feeling of oppression. This translation also helps readers not just understand, but they'll actually feel the concept. So it sets a tone. It also uses some form of the senses, descriptive writing. Metaphors can also reveal hidden similarities. So they illuminate surprising connections between disparate things. Here's another example. The classroom was a beehive. This is going to reveal organizational patterns, industry of the children moving around, and potential danger simultaneously. And this parallel that this creates, the classroom and the beehive, creates an aha moment for the reader. We immediately understand that it's busy, it's active, it's humming, all of these great things that you associate with beehives. Another thing that metaphors do as conceptual bridges is create emotional shortcuts. Metaphors bypass lengthy explanations because they tap into existing emotional associations. So when you have a phrase like, "his words were daggers," readers instantly understand the pain and the intentionality of that sentence. The tone is there as well. Daggers are rarely used in a pleasant context. So this compression is going to create immediate emotional resonance for the reader. Metaphors also add dimensional layers. So a well-placed or well-chosen metaphor brings the entire world associated with it. So if we write something like "their love was a battlefield," this also brings along or imports the concepts of strategy, of wounds, of victory and defeat and endurance. It's not a pleasant concept just because of the comparison with something so different from love, a battlefield. This also creates a rich subtext and implications beyond the literal meaning that we have on the page. Metaphors can also facilitate universal understanding because they give specific experiences. So they can translate unique experiences into universally understood concepts. Even if readers haven't experienced grief, for example, if you're very fortunate and you've never lost something or someone, they can understand a phrase like "grief is an ocean" because they've experienced water's overwhelming wave-like qualities, its incessant moving of the tides and coming towards you. So this can create a connection across life experiences and even cultures. So now that we kind of know how metaphors can work, we're going to take a look at some ways to use metaphors. And the best metaphors don't just describe things, they transform our understanding. When writers create fresh, unexpected metaphors rather than just relying on cliches, they invite writers to see the world in new ways. There are lots of different types of metaphors. We're going to take a look at a few. One is the extended metaphor. Extended metaphors are also called sustained metaphors. In poetry, it's called a conceit. They're comparative relationships that develop throughout longer work rather than just appearing briefly in a single instance. So they can become powerful narrative tools because they can create thematic unity and emotional depth. Unlike a one-off metaphor where you're just, using a sentence or a phrase with one metaphor, extended metaphors evolve and then disappear and reappear. They gain new dimensions and significance as the story progresses. So they can serve as thematic anchors that help develop your theme and reinforce central ideas. They can also serve as emotional throw lines that guide reader feelings. They can also be structural frameworks that help organize your content. Some examples here from fiction. In The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald uses light and color metaphors throughout. Gatsby's green light represents hope, the unattainable dream. It can also represent money. The eyes on the billboard that has Dr. T.J. Eckelberg on it represent watchful judgment. And the Valley of Ashes represent moral and social decay. In Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, the author uses horizon metaphors. The opening line even starts with this: ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. That's a lovely sentence. Throughout the novel, the horizon is going to represent the protagonist, Janie's hopes and possibilities. And by the end, Janie is not just waiting for her hopes and dreams. She's pulled in her horizon like a great fish net. She now has control. In 1984, George Orwell threads the metaphor of physical decay with the surroundings and with character development. Winston's varicose ulcer, for example, is going to worsen as the social decay in the novel progresses. The physical deterioration of the buildings also parallel the crumbling of society. And the metaphor is going to culminate in Winston's complete physical and spiritual breakdown by the close of the novel. So extended metaphors are going to work best when they grow organically from the narrative, rather than feeling forced or over-explained. When they're done well, they feel like they create a satisfying cohesion that makes the entire work feel more intentional and profound. You actually can set this up prior to generating your book with the themes that appear in your book proposal, and again, by creating an element that's a metaphor that you can add to your writing. Scribbler's AI can also create metaphors for you. The describe metaphor function will create metaphors. You can also highlight a sentence and ask the AI to create a metaphor with the rewrite custom function. So here are some examples of some one-off metaphors from literature. One is from Dante's Inferno, and it's the book begins, or the long poem begins with, "In the middle of the journey of our life, I found myself in a dark wood, for the straight way was lost." And this opening metaphor from Dante's Inferno is going to portray life as a journey where one can become lost. The dark wood represents spiritual confusion, a moral crisis, while the straight way is the righteous path, the path that he should be on. This metaphor works very well. It transforms the abstract concept of spiritual crisis into physical disorientation. It also establishes the entire framework for Dante's literal and figurative journey that's going to take him from the Inferno to the Paradiso. It resonates universally with readers who have felt lost in their own lives. If you imagine yourself getting lost in the woods, that can really work as a spiritual concept, the way that Dante poses it here. So another example from Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. The watch ticking on in the quiet, and the three of us, and then in the spring, it happened, I give him the watch. I give you the mausoleum of all hope and desire. I give it to you not that you may remember time, but that you might forget it now and then for a moment, and not spend all of your breath trying to conquer it. So Faulkner's metaphor here represents time as a relentless adversary that's either to be confronted or temporarily escaped. What makes it exceptional is that it uses time with predatory qualities. It makes an abstract concept feel threatening. It creates a tension between remembering and forgetting time, and it suggests the futility of the human struggle against time's passage. We are all mortal. Here's another example from Shakespeare's Macbeth, and you'll see how much he layers and layers and layers metaphors together in this passage. This is Macbeth speaking. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this pretty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So here, Shakespeare is going to create a complex metaphor where Macbeth is comparing human life to meaningless acting performance. So again, Shakespeare is using the acting metaphor. The brilliance lies in the layering of these multiple metaphors, the candle, the shadow, the actor, the tale. We have the comparison of human significance to weather phenomena, sound and fury, which Faulkner, of course, will use in his title of his book. And it also embodies Macbeth's profound existential despair through concrete images. It's such a despairing passage with which it was such deep language. You could spend, a whole day reading through it and discussing it with other people. So a couple of tips for using metaphors if you're planning to include them in your work. You want to focus on freshness. Avoid cliches like cold as ice or busy as a bee. These are idioms or cliches. They're just not clever in writing. They're done to death. They've been used too many times. You want to try to create unexpected connections that surprise the reader. Look for comparisons that no one has made before. You want to aim for precision as well. Choose metaphors that capture exactly what you want to convey. Consider the specific emotional tone that you're targeting. You might be looking for something to compare that's positive or negative. These are things to consider with the tenor and vehicle, the parts of the metaphor you choose to use. The best metaphors feel inevitable when we read them, as if no other comparison would work. You can also describe from use the five senses, draw from your five senses, and not just visual comparisons. You could look to something like Scribbler's describe function to rewrite your metaphor as well. So an example would be her laugh was sandpaper. You get this idea that it's gravelly and rough and not pleasant from that. And that engages touch more than something like her laugh was ugly. We get a sensation from the comparison to sandpaper. Sensory metaphors are going to create more immediate physical responses in your readers. This one, for example, about the sandpaper makes me cringe. Think about your context as well. Match your metaphors to your character's perspective and knowledge. So if you're writing a book about a sailor, he's going to use different metaphors than a doctor would, and your writing should maybe reflect that. Make sure the metaphors you're using fit your story's time period and setting. You don't want to have something like a typewriter if you're writing a historical novel set in the 1400s. Some more tips, create resonance for your readers. Choose metaphors that are going to connect with your theme, as we saw with The Great Gatsby. The best metaphors are going to work on multiple layers simultaneously. So for example, in a story about betrayal, you might compare someone's smile to a trap with teeth. This could work both descriptively and thematically. Maybe the first time we meet this character, we read this description of them, and this relationship between the character with this other character is going to decline and become negative in the way that this trap sounds. Make sure you test your metaphors for clarity. Readers need to be able to understand the connection between your tenor and your vehicle without explaining it. If you need to explain the metaphor, it's probably not working. It's like a terrible joke that you just don't get. So ask yourself, does this clarify or confuse? You could even ask your beta reader, is this working? Do you understand it? Use restraint. A powerful metaphor needs space to breathe, so too many in close proximity diminish each other's impact. It's very difficult to do what Shakespeare does in that soliloquy from Macbeth. So, be cautious and don't overwork it or use too many all at once. Save your strongest metaphors for really important parts of your writing, your novel or your screenplay as well. You might want to extend your metaphors where appropriate. Sometimes a metaphor deserves development beyond just a single line. So an extended metaphor can become an organizing principle for entire scenes that you're writing. For example, if you're comparing an argument between two characters, like as a fencing match, you might continue this by using terms from fencing with parry, thrust, disarm. All of these terms are from fencing. You want to revise, finally, your metaphors ruthlessly. First attempts at metaphors are rarely the best. They're not easy to write. So when you're revising, ask yourself, is there a more original way to express this? And sometimes simplifying a metaphor can actually make it stronger. So just for fun, your turn. I've made 2 columns. You can pause the video if you'd like to. The idea here is to take something from column 1 and create a metaphor with it by comparing it to something in column 2. Try to go for things that are not the way that you would expect. In other words, I didn't put the word rose in here so we could compare it to love. That's been done so many times. Try to pick something that's very opposite as you're creating your metaphor, and feel free to post it into the chat or onto our Discord channel so we can all cheer you on as you're working on your metaphors. So in this webinar, we have reviewed functional and memorable writing. Hopefully we're all moving towards memorable. Using the metaphor and how to use them, different ways to use them and why they work. And then we also took a look at some tips for using metaphors. Thank you, as always, for joining us. It's always great to have you here, and we will see you next week. Bye, everybody.